He was asking me, how's the preaching going in London? And that year, there were so many nice boys and girls who were joining our temple. And we were becoming very quickly overcrowded. The brahmachari rooms and the brahmacharini rooms were overflowing with devotees. We had about 65 devotees living in a tiny little property that was really meant for only 10 or 12 devotees. So I wrote this report to Prabhupada, and he wrote back and he said, well, you should contact our good friend Mr. George Harrison and ask him to help us to find a bigger property. And he happened to be in town. That's the year that he was also recording the album, which he later called Living in the Material World. And in the insert to the album sleeve, he also had a big colored photograph printed of Krishna and Arjuna, the same picture that you see on the cover of Bhagavad Gita as it is. In fact, when I used to go and visit him, I'd take him all different kinds of prasadam, all his favorite types of preps that he really was attached to eating, like deep fried potatoes, cauliflower, and deep fried curd soaked in sour cream, and samosas, and cauliflower pakoras, and different kinds of sweets like different burfis, and sandesh, and simply wonderfuls, and this strawberry buttermilk nectar that we became very famous at making. So, and in the beginning I was seeing him like once a week, and then gradually, because he actually said, you can come as often as you want. If you're going to keep bringing all this stuff, it's an open invitation, come as often as you want. So I ended up eventually visiting him 3 or 4 times a week. And then when I felt it was the right opportunity, I said, George, we have a situation which is happening in our temple now that we're getting so many new devotees and we're running out of space. Is it possible you could help us find a bigger place? He said, sure, no problem. He didn't hesitate. And he said to me, you should go along and visit different estate agents and arrange appointments to see different properties, and if you find some really good properties, then why don't you call me and I'll come out with you and check it out myself. And so that's what was happening. And all this time, the deities were just lying in this sewing room, the deities that we just got from India. Because generally, I think what happens is that when there's a new temple project coming up, first we get the house or we get the land donated or something like that, and then the deities come after. But in this particular situation, the deities came 1 year before we actually, of course, acquired what was to be, as we know now internationally, the Bhaktivedanta manor. So when Prabhupada came in 1973, that was in the summer of 73, he asked me, he said, so where are those deities that came to England in 1972? I told us they're stored in Berry Place. He said, we will install these deities in this property. And so, of course, that's what happened. On Janmashtami Day of 1973, Srila Prabhupada installed the deities, and he named them Sri Sri Radha Gokulananda. And the reason he named them like that was because he had the intention of calling that property New Gokula. New Gokula, that was the name he liked. He wanted to actually call the community New Gokula. And so, the bliss of Gokula is Radha Gokulananda. Did I tell the story about how we actually called up George? Because, I'd gone out with him and looked at 8 different properties in 1972. And in January of 1973, in this freezing cold, miserable British winter, we got this information about this property, which is known as Piggott's Manor in Latchmore Heath, 17 miles from central London. And this is the one and only time I went in disguise. I didn't go as a devotee. I didn't go with a shaved head and a dhoti and tilak and kurta. But I went in trousers and coat and hat and didn't wear tilak to meet this lady, Mrs. Ruffles. And the interesting thing is too that the price difference, because the previous property that I looked at with George, all this time actually Shamsundar wasn't in the country because he was actually Prabhupada's secretary, so he was traveling wherever Prabhupada happened to be traveling at the time. He was out of the country. And I was keeping in touch with Srila Prabhupada. Prabhupada was very anxious to know what was going on because time was dragging and on. And in fact, Prabhupada did mention, he said, we should strike while the iron is hot. And he was presuming that the iron was getting a little cold, by this time, because, we started searching in the kind of early summer of 1972, and this was like, the end of 72, and nothing had really happened. And so the previous property I looked at with George was this amazing health spa just outside of the city of Oxford. And it had an indoor heated swimming pool. It had a beautiful conservatory where they served all the salads and things. And it had all these different facilities for taking saunas and mud baths and so on and so forth. And plus, there was quite a bit of land attached to it. It was about over 100 acres of land. So the asking price was £330,000. So when I took George out to this property, and he looked at her and he said, "This is a bit rich for you people, isn't it? A bit rich for your blood." I said, "You're supposed to be renunciates." I said, "Even I would have a hard time remaining Krishna conscious in this kind of environment." So he didn't particularly like it. And then, of course, we got the details on the manor, and this property was being sold for £220,000, so it was £110,000 cheaper than the previous property. So and he didn't come this particular time. I called him up from where is now the temple room at the manor. There was a payphone there. So I phoned him, I said, "I'm at this place," and I gave him a verbal description and the details and the price. And he said, "Well, it's a lot cheaper than the previous one you looked at." He says, "What do you think?" I said, "I think it's a fabulous place." I said, "All right, I trust you. I trust your judgment by now." He said, I can't come with you because I have to fly out to Los Angeles. We're having some meetings with our financial advisor, Alan Klein, about selling the Apple company. That's what they were going to do. He was going to meet with the other members of the Apple company and how to solve, dissolve the business. So he said, here's the name of the legal people to take care of, actually buying the property. And this is the phone number. You just phone them up straight away. Tell them that you want to secure this property. And when everything's finalized, all the legal papers and the transaction is complete, then I'll come and see it at that time. So that took about 6 months. And what he did was, he had set up this foundation, which he called the Material World Charitable Foundation. And he told me, they said, if this album I've just finished making, Living in the Material World, is successful, then all the profits from all the tracks from that LP will go towards paying for the manor, for that property. But it'll go through my foundation. So that's what happened. And so the property was paid for by this Material World Charitable Foundation. And we were staying there, and the agreement was that we would be paying £10 a year rent. That's how much was asked. That's called a peppercorn rent. It's like the absolute minimum amount that you could pay for a costly property. But we didn't have anything in writing. It was all in good faith. It was just a verbal agreement. When George came, he came also to see Srila Prabhupada, because Prabhupada was also there at that time. And I remember there was one English artist called Gopal who had painted Srila Prabhupada standing close to the lake on the property. And George really liked that painting of Prabhupada. And he liked the location, and he liked the price as well. Previously in 1972 there's some footage of this, of George and Prabhupada visiting another property called Runnymede Farm. Now Runnymede Farm is right on the banks of the River Thames. Runnymede is a very historical place. That's where the Magna Carta was signed, way back in the 13th century, early 13th century, by the King of England, King John, at that time. And so that was the only time that Prabhupada actually came to see one of the properties that I'd arranged for George to see as well. Prabhupada was also interested. And the farm hadn't been used for about 3 or 4 years, so it was all overgrown. So when George arrived and he looked around, he said they should call this farm Runny Down Farm, not Runnymede Farm. And we walked around, and there is some footage of that. I can't remember actually even who took the film. I know that Shyam Sundar was also there. And no, not Paddy, just George. George came in his Porsche from Friar Park. And this older English devotee called Bhakti Pramod, he worked as a security manager for the Midland Bank, the British Bank, the Midland Bank. And he actually drove us. He drove Shyam Sundar and Prabhupada and myself in his car to the property. He liked to do that. He loved to fuss around Prabhupada, and he called Prabhupada Your Grace. You know, he never called Prabhupada Prabhupada. He would say, how is your grace this morning? Are you feeling cold? I've got a travel blanket. I'd like to tuck this travel blanket around your legs so you don't get the cold on your... You know, he was really quite a fascinating, intriguing kind of person. And he also liked Highland dancing, Scottish Highland dancing. I remember him and his wife, Yashoda Mai, they came to visit Prabhupada for an evening darshan at the very place. And he was in his full Highland dress kit with a kilt. And he came in and he paid his obeisances, and his wife paid her obeisances. And he had his tweed jacket on, he had the kilt with the sporran and the long stockings with the ski and do, that little knife tucked into the top of the stockings, and he was sitting on the floor, and he didn't, because he was elderly, he was like in his mid to late 50s actually, and he couldn't sit really cross-legged properly on the carpet, so he had his knees up in the air and with his kilt, and Prabhupada was like looking straight, up his kilt. And Prabhupada was looking and said, what is that you're wearing? And he said, oh, this is typical Scottish dress, Your Grace, because we just come back from, some Highland dancing. And then Prabhupada looked and he said, you're feeling comfortable in that skirt? Or would you prefer to sit in a chair? Because he was like, kind of exposing himself to Srila Prabhupada. Anyway, this is the same person that drove Prabhupada. He would drive him to Rath Yatra, to wherever Prabhupada wanted to go. Sometimes he would try to get Prabhupada to go on like little tours around London. He wanted to take Prabhupada to see the Roman ruins. Because, London is a very ancient city, and the Romans established the first city called Londinium, and there's still some Roman walls of some ramparts and things like that. And he took him around and showed him Buckingham Palace and different places. London Bridge. So Prabhupada actually liked Bhakti Pramod a lot. And so there we were in this Runnymede farm, and we walk up to the main house, and I remember it was quite an impressive build. It wasn't like a standard farmhouse. This was a house with some substance. It had large column pillars at the front, high vaulted ceilings and a beautiful staircase. It was like a small stately home on the property. So I remember we're standing there with Srila Prabhupada, all of us, including George, and we're just discussing the possibility of moving into this property. And then Prabhupada stopped us and said, so before we move in, first, he said, beside this house we will build a bank. And then he pointed to Bhakti Pramod and he said, and you will be the bank manager, because you have some experience in banking, because you work for this, world famous Midland bank. And then he pointed his finger at George and he said, George, you will deposit all your money in that bank, and we will spend everything in Krishna's service. George was like taken aback, said, all my money will go. And we all laughed when Prabhupada came out, because that was, that was completely unexpected that he would say something like that. I don't know if I told you the story about how we acquired the manor from this Scottish lady, Mrs. Ruffles. She was from Aberdeen, which is a city in northern Scotland. And you know the story about the Scots being quite mean, but even in Scotland, people from Aberdeen who are called Aberdonians are considered extremely mean. And but she, not only was she from Aberdeen, but she was also Jewish. So she was a Jewish Aberdonian. And what she had done was, before we'd actually moved into the property, she had removed every single doorknob from every single door. She had taken the brass door knocker. It was a lion's head. It was actually two. There's a pair of these door knockers on the front doors to the house, and she had removed those. She had removed all the pelmets. She had siphoned off all the diesel fuel from the tanks, for the central heating. She had taken away all the coal, because there was also a lot of fireplaces in the big rooms. So in some places where Prabhupada wanted to see the rooms, because there was a number of rooms, he really wanted to go like an inspection. There's a couple of doors we couldn't open because there's no doorknob there's no door handle or anything to open the door to get into the rooms. We had to show him later on. And then finally, when we showed him his quarters upstairs, he was very, very happy. He said, yes, this is a nice facility for the spiritual master, because he had a huge living room and a huge old-fashioned bathroom and a very comfortable bedroom. So when George came back from his visit to Los Angeles, one of the first things he did was he made a point of actually coming and visiting the manor. And we took him on the tour of every place, of all the rooms and everything, because by that time we'd gotten a hold of door handles and doorknobs and things like that. So he was really curious about everything, and he wanted to see the kitchen garden. He wanted to see the lake and everything. So we showed him all these places, and I remember actually Shyam Sundar, he brought him to the temple room and he said, "Wouldn't some beautiful crystal chandeliers look really great in this temple room?" And George said, "Yeah, that'd be really nice." And so he got George to pay for a pair of crystal chandeliers. They cost like £3,000, and he had just bought this place for us as well. On top of that, Anyway, but he liked it. I mean, he thought it was value for money. So I was just going to say, by 1980, we were still obviously, living at the manor, worshipping Radha Gokulananda, and there were many Indian businessmen who wanted to get involved in what we were doing at the manor, and they knew that there was a lot of restoration work and repairs had to be done, and plus we had to build a car park. But they didn't want to give their money because they would ask, ultimately, well, who owns this property? Does ISKCON own it, or does somebody else own it? And we had to tell them, actually, it's owned by George's foundation. So they would say, well, is he to be trusted? I mean, if he decided one day he didn't like you Hare Krishnas anymore, he could just say, all right, get out of there. There's nothing in writing, there's no agreement, no legal binding document, and you'd be out in your ear. And we'd be given all these donations for nothing, So we don't want to do that. So at the time, Vichadravirya, he was the temple president, and he asked me, he said, could you get in touch with George and find out how he feels, what's his feeling about us and his feeling about this property. So I called him, and he came over, and he had a good look around. And so we had been occupying the manor now for 7 years, because we moved in 73, in the summer of 73, and this is like the summer of 1980. We'd also had the property appraised by two banks, the Lloyds Bank and the Barclays Bank. And we'd also, gone to our solicitor to get, to seek legal advice, what course of action we should take. So I put it to George. I said, really, what we want is either we pay a rent, and you give us a 100-year lease or something like that, or we can pay the property, in installments over, 10 or 15 years or something. But we really want to stay here. We've got so many people who want to give, sizable donations. £10,000, £20,000, maybe even more than that, but they know that we don't own the property. So we walked around, and he didn't like the fact that we hadn't maintained the gardens, because by that time he'd really got into gardening in a big way, and he identified himself as being a gardener. And I'd been over to his place, Friar Park, and seen what he'd done over the years, and it was amazing. I mean, he really got into even knowing all the Latin names of every plant and every herb, and he had really done a wonderful job in his property. And he looked at our gardens, and they were like all full of weeds, and because by that time most qualified devotees were on the streets selling books. They weren't in the manor gardening and weeding and trimming hedges and planting. That wasn't really our focal point of attention. So we didn't have any good gardeners, and the place was a terrible mess. He said, I'm getting a headache just walking around here. It's just like getting on my wick. You haven't looked after this place. And I was fearing the worst. He said, give me a week to think about it, and I'll let you know. Because he wouldn't tell me on the spot what he had decided. So he calls me up a week later, and he said, look, this is what I've decided. If you can get together £45,000, because actually he wanted to give the place as a donation, but he couldn't legally, because a charitable foundation can't donate any property to another charity. There has to be some financial transaction. So he said, I've spoken with Alan Klein again, and what he's come up with is this. You put towards the cost of the property £45,000. He said, I'll put from my side another 145, which makes a total of 190. And we'll show it as a loss, that we actually sold the property to you as a loss. He says, I know you can't afford 190, but if you can come up with 45,000 within a week, the place is yours. Then I don't need to think about it anymore. And actually, like I told you, the property cost 220, so he's making a loss of about 30,000 through the books, at least. Now, as I had mentioned also, we had made an appraisal with two banks, and both had appraised the property at £1.5 million by 1980. That's how much it had increased in value, from £220,000 to £1.5 million. So we got the £45,000 together, we gave it to him, he signed the deeds over to ISKCON, and from that day onwards, the manor belonged to ISKCON. And a couple of things Prabhupada did say to me was kind of interesting, because it was, like I said, it was raining when he first came and he wanted to see his quarters. And he told me two things. He said, this property is like gold kept in a dark place. He says to appreciate the value of gold, requires light, especially sunshine, bright light, because gold naturally shines. But if you keep it in a dark place, then who can appreciate? So and similarly, he said this is a very valuable property, but because, of the weather conditions, who can appreciate? Because he was always really down in the British weather. I mean, it was like always raining and cloudy and miserable. Because, occasionally it would also be sunny, and we have these beautiful photographs and footage of Prabhupada sitting outside on the lawn on sunny days, at the manor.
1 day a year.
Or a week, maybe 2 weeks, And the other thing he said, because Prabhupada is very shrewd, he said, this is like a white elephant. This property is a white elephant. It's a white elephant is something very rare and very valuable, but it's very expensive to maintain. He said, similarly, this property you will find, will be very expensive to run. And it was very true what he said. Yeah, very true. And also what he said was, the other thing he was talking, and maybe I've mentioned this before, that he wanted the manor to be a place where it was famous for cow protection. He wanted that we buy a double-decker bus, these red London transport buses, an old one, drive it into the centre of London, fill it up with visitors who would be willing to come out and look at the manor, spend some time there. And he said that we should teach the British the importance of cow protection, Goraksh. And he said we should keep 150 cows at the manor. Now, at that time, we had 17 acres of land, and there was only 6 acres of arable land, a field where we could actually keep cows. And so I kind of commented, I said, well, Prabhupada, it's not going to be very practical to keep 150 cows and 6 acres of land, because each cow requires a minimum of 1 acre of land. So then Prabhupada said, so you purchase 150 acres for the cows. What is the difficulty? But that's the minimum number of cows you should keep. So if you need to purchase another 150 acres for those cows, then you purchase. So that was said in 1973. Of course, since then, we've acquired another 55 acres of land. Because in 1997 we got the planning permission to put in the new approach road, and so we've just about got half of the amount of land that Prabhupada said we should have in 1973. And this is now 2002.
And how many cows?
25 cows. There's only 25. So Prabhupada's vision was always, very long range. We sometimes have a hard time in fulfilling, Srila Prabhupada's vision. So there's still another 75, 80 acres of land to be purchased, and because there is no place in the UK where this type of cow protection is being practiced. And of course, the idea to have so many animals was that then we'd be completely self-sufficient in ghee and milk. And he wanted us to sell the ghee to the visitors who were coming. And also he wanted us to be engaged in different types of handicrafts, like spinning and weaving cloth and making brass deities and all different kinds of handicrafts. And I said, well, what about the Indian community? Should we focus on the Indian community? Now this is perhaps may sound a little controversial, but Prabhupada said, no, we don't need to bother with the Indian community. They're already Krishna conscious. He said, we have to focus our attention on the British community. He said, they know nothing about Krishna. That's what he said. George and his wife, Olivia, they visited the manor in 1997. Was that ever touched? I thought that was quite amazing, because that was really the last time that George associated with a large group of devotees. And he had been invited to this like celebratory dinner, which was held in the summer of 1997, just a few days after we got the actual planning permission to build in the new approach road. And this was also shortly after we had this amazing fundraising dinner called Prabhupada's Dream, where all the patron members of the manor were invited to raise the funds to buy the extra land to put in the approach road. And the target was to raise £1 million in one evening. So a large circus tent was rented, and it was heated, and there was a stage erected there, and so all the tables were also put out, with a very nice dinner served at the table to all these invited guests and patrons. And during the course of the fundraising, there was a very positive response. So within about 2 hours of the program, we had raised £800,000. We were £200,000 short. And there was an Irish businessman who imported Indian clothing, had been invited by one of his business friends who happened to be a patron member of the manor. And he had been once before to the manor, and he had taken part in Arti and also the lecture, but this is the first time he'd actually attended a special patrons evening with a special dinner put on, and the whole fundraising program in full swing. So it was apparent that we weren't going to raise more than £800,000 that evening, and it was like one final attempt to reach the target of £1 million. So there was an outstanding £200,000 donation coming from we didn't know where. And this Irishman, Michael, was so impressed with the Prabhupada's dream, what he wanted. I mean, it's kind of connected with what Prabhupada wanted to begin with anyway, to have 150 acres of land and to do the cow protection, have 150 cows. And he really appreciated that. That was what Prabhupada had really desired. So on his second visit to the manor, he pledged £200,000. He pledged more than any other patron member who'd been along to, several, maybe at least 5 or 6, maybe 10 visits to the manor, maybe more than that. Usually they would come once every 3 months and do like a special dinner for these patrons, because each patron already was pledging £1,008 per year. And we have now over 400 patron members who pledge £1,008 per family. So that was a substantial amount of money for a person of non-Indian origin, but it was an Irish businessman, and very auspicious. It was a very auspicious evening. So George agreed to come, and we had no idea if his wife was going to come, because both were invited, but Olivia never would attend any kind of public function like that. Firstly, because she wasn't really a great fan of the Hare Krishna devotees. She was following somebody else. And she always just kind of left it up to her husband to go along to these things. But she came. I went to the car park at the manor to welcome him with a Gujarati devotee called Srila Dharma. He's a Swami disciple. And they had they were very enthusiastic. They had come prepared. They brought welly boots with them, these rubber boots, because they wanted to walk through all the fields and see where the new approach road was going to be built. And so we did that. We walked, the whole length from the very beginning where the main gate was going to be, right to the manor property, which is about a half a mile. And we were stopping and talking, and he was checking out the fields and so on, and, well, how far does the property extend on this side of the road? How far the other side of the road? Are you going to have any kind of hedges or trees so that the road doesn't, doesn't look ugly, doesn't spoil the overall, beauty of the farmland. And so we got into, a lot of details. And when we were coming back towards the building, George, kind of volunteered. He said, it'd be great if you really want to have a successful business. One thing I can suggest is you start a garden centre. Now, in England, garden centres are usually very successful, where families will come and they'll buy. Maybe they've just moved into their new home, and they want to have different trees and shrubs and whatever put in their gardens. So garden centres are incredibly successful. So he said, if you want to do that, and it's not going to, I don't think you need planning permission for this. I mean, he put a lot of careful thought into why he was coming up with this idea. And also, of course, like I said, he always identified himself as being a gardener. He was a gardener first and a musician second, So, and he would say, I'll help you set it up and, whatever, So we were really happy that he was kind of so open-minded to what we were doing. And so then we took him to the temple, and he came in front of our, we've got two altars there. There's Radha Gokulananda's altar, the Sitaram Lakshman Hanuman, and little Gornitai in between the two altars. And he paid his full dandavats to the deities there, and he took Charnamrita, and so did Olivia. Olivia didn't pay full dandavat, she pranammed, she didn't get down, and, she wasn't as surrendered as George, George would always do that in front of Prabhupada. He'd love to pay full dandavats out of respect to Srila Prabhupada. But she was quite respectful. And we went into the room where we were going to have the dinner. And we'd arranged the tables in such a way that the head table, there was going to be Shamsundar, and also Mukunda were there too, along with Shriram Swami, Krishnadas Swami, and my wife and myself, and Akanditi and his wife. Akanditi was the temple president in '97. And he had actually, it was a long, hard-fought campaign. It started in 1982. And it ran for 15 years. And in '94, we had this amazing thing happened. That because we're always in the public eye, we're always in the news, media, television, newspapers, the radio. There was always news reporters coming and interviewing the devotees, because it was basically a freedom of religion case. That the local council, district council, wanted to close down our operation. They didn't want to have it as a public place of worship because it wasn't planned as such. It was actually planned as a nurses' training college. It was actually one time owned by St. Bartholomew's Hospital, which is a very, very old hospital, which is in the city of London. And this Mrs. Ruffles, who I had mentioned, had bought it from St. Bart's, and then she ran out of money. She wanted to turn it into a nursing home, but she couldn't, carry the financial burden, and that's why she sold it on. And then, of course, we moved in, and all of a sudden there was all these, festivals going on, and thousands of visitors, and all their cars were, in the village, and so we wanted to take the strain off the village, and we didn't like the villagers were always irate with their festivals and functions and sound and so on. So in '97, this is like the last year of the Conservative government, and he was a cabinet minister, John Selwyn Gummer. He was the Minister of the Environment. He announced publicly on television that they had come to this agreement, that they would give us the planning permission to keep the manor open to the public. And he'd agreed that it could be given the planning permission to be a public place of worship. Because up until 1997, we never had anything like that either given to us by the government or by the district council. No recognition like that. So that was a great victory. So we had this, this victory dinner, and everybody who had been involved in the campaign, right from the very beginning, and had joined later on, were all there. They were all, VIP guests, including some MPs and legal people and newspaper people and so on. And so, of course, George had given the manor. And what a candidate did was, he was praising everybody in the room, and there was like over 200 people. And it was a nice dinner, actually. My wife had Balagopal, she cooked the feast for that. And so everyone was being honored by a candidate. He was mentioning this person and this person and this person, going through all the different guests that were present. And then finally he came to George, and he said, of course, really we have to thank George, because this would never have happened if he hadn't agreed to donate this property. And so before he spoke, and he wasn't actually really expected to speak. He was like an honored guest as well, but he wasn't expected to say anything. But before he spoke, his wife got up. And so Olivia stood up and she said, I am so deeply touched by what I've heard and what I've seen tonight that I feel impelled I have to say something. And so she said, I can see that, George has got true friends here, and I feel very happy for him. I feel very happy for myself that I've come and witnessed this amazing gathering. And I'm so happy I didn't miss this opportunity. And this is the one and only time that Olivia came out to the manor. You have to try to understand this. I mean, when I used to try to go and see George, if I phoned ahead of time and she answered the phone, she would be really rude. She would, try to stop me from visiting her husband. She just didn't want any intrusion into their privacy. And she didn't even see the point of us going and visiting, me or whoever it was else, going to see him. And I always used to kind of pray that I hope she doesn't pick up the phone. I hope it's the nanny, because she was looking after their son Danny, and when he used to visit, and she was really nice. She liked us. Olivia didn't like us until that particular evening, and I was like really taken aback. And then when she sat down, Shamsundar Mukunda presented George with this little Prabhupada Murti with the Prabhupada Swami hat and the glasses and the bead bag and the little book rest and a tiny little miniature size, Bhagavad Gita, and a little Vyasa san and a sannyasi danda, and and a little pair of kartals and a little pair of glasses. And it's like really cute. And George was like, he was cradling this, Prabhupada, and saying, I'm going to be taking Prabhupada home with me tonight, It really touched his heart. He said, I didn't really want to say anything, but I also feel I've got to say something too. I mean, he was really moved as well. And he said, first of all, I have to say, I feel kind of ashamed that I never participated in this campaign, which was true. He never came forward. He never gave any support, either verbally or any other way, in the press or whatever. He said, I really feel kind of ashamed that I didn't do that. But and he said I was following it. He said, it wasn't like I didn't know what was going on. It was always on the television or in the papers what you were doing. And he said I was always thinking in the back of my mind, if it didn't work out, at the end of the day, if you had to close down the manor, he said you could all move over to my place in Henley, and you could take over Fire Park, and that could be your new temple. That's what he said. His heart was talking, because he was just so moved by what he'd heard,
And Olivia's eyes went.
And it was just like, we just started clapping like anything. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, George was, an exceptional personality in so many ways. When I used to go and see him, and I was kind of in charge of trying to fire him up to give a donation, and I didn't hesitate to do that because, that's what Prabhupada told me I should do. We needed a place too, out of necessity. And I would say to him sometime, why don't you take initiation from Prabhupada? You love Prabhupada like anything. I mean, he was constantly thinking how to spread Krishna consciousness too. When that album, Living in the Material World, it's actually, if you look at the album cover, it's a double cover. It's not just a slip cover where you put the record in. It's it folds out. Although it's one single album. The reason for that is, originally what he wanted to do was, he wanted to slip into the other slip cover, when it was empty, a set of japa beads in a bead bag with a set of instructions how to use it, to be sold along with the record. Because actually a lot of the lyrics in that album are very Krishna conscious. He dedicated one of the songs called "The Lord Loves the One Who Loves the Lord." He said, I wrote that for Srila Prabhupada. And he's very clear in, who that was meant for, He got inspired. He actually told me he got inspired when I would go and visit him and interrupt him. In fact, sometimes he'd put on this kind of air that I was like costing him thousands of pounds. He said at one time, he said, every time you come here, I can't get any recording done. I said, this is an expensive recording studio. It's probably costing £3,000 a day just to be down here. I said, when you come, I don't get anything done. We just sit down, eat prasadam, and talk about Prabhupada and Krishna consciousness, And he loved distributing Prabhupada's Gita to his friends, and also we'd supply him with beads and bead bags for his friends to chant. He was really into the whole mood of, pushing Krishna consciousness. And giving. Yeah, giving this wonderful opportunity that he had received from devotees and from Srila Prabhupada to others. I mean, he really wanted that to happen. So getting back to when I asked him about why don't you take initiation from Prabhupada, he says, I don't need to, I've already got a spiritual name. I said, what do you mean you got a spiritual name? He said, my name's Hari Son of Hari. And he laughed, that broadside of Liverpudlian kind of humour, dry humour he's got. When he visited Prabhupada actually in 1976 at the manor, he asked the same question. He said, do you think I should move into the ashram, shave up, wear tilak, wear dhoti? Prabhupada said no. Because he came with Ravi Shankar's sister, Lakshmi Shankar, who just recorded one song called Krishna, Where Are You? And so he had made the musical arrangements, written the words, and she had sung it. And he played that for Prabhupada, and Prabhupada listened to it. And he said, yes, he said, this is the mood of the 6 Goswamis. Krishna, where are you? I've not captured you. I would love to capture you. I'd love to have you in my vision, eternally, but you're always disappearing out of my sight. This feeling of separation. I said, Vipralamba. So this is very pleasing. So you go on writing lyrics and music like this. So this is your service to Krishna. But you live outside, he said. It will not be good for you to live in the ashram. He said you remain outside and you can do much more preaching. You'll reach many more people. Prabhupada was, very understanding. And one time he actually went with Ravi Shankar, and when they went in to see, Prabhupada was actually there at the time when they came in. And when George came in front of Prabhupada, like I said, he loved paying his full dandavats. So he did that in the presence of Ravi Shankar. And Ravi Shankar's got a bit of an ego, obviously, because he's a musician and very talented. And he always presumed that George was his disciple. So there was a little bit of sort of envy going on because he never did that in front of him. He did it in front of Prabhupada. And Prabhupada immediately understood Ravi Shankar's mood. So he sent George, after speaking with him, he said, "You must be hungry. Go to the kitchen and get prasadam." And he told one devotee to take him. And so when he was in the kitchen eating samosas or whatever else he was enjoying, he sat with Ravi Shankar, and that kind of pacified, that placated Ravi Shankar's kind of false ego. And then the whole conversation centered around plane tickets and travel, which is the best airline to travel on. Because Prabhupada understood that Ravi Shankar was not interested in any kind of, spiritual philosophy. But he just talked to him and he related to him in a way that he could, just keep up the conversation. Prabhupada was expert at dealing with everybody. Because he knew George's love for prasadam, and he knew there was something going on between him and Ravi Shankar, and 1970, and it was Bhaktivedanta Swami Thakur's disappearance day in December. And it was just after Mangalarti, 5 o'clock in the morning. This driver had come, and he was driving this stretch Mercedes limousine, big white Mercedes, with blacked out windows. And he had a piece of paper with my name in it. And so I was called out of the temple room, and there was this chauffeur. He had his cap on and his dark suit, and his polished shoe, black shoes. And then so I identified myself, and he said, "Oh, I've just been told to take you down to the fruit and vegetable market." I said, "Who's told you to do this?" He said, "Well, George Harrison is with John Lennon on a yacht on the Thames." And he just remembered it was a special spiritual master's day. It was a very auspicious day. So he said he's given me £100, and John has given permission to use his Mercedes to take you down to this fruit and vegetable market with £100 to spend, to get nice fruits and vegetables so you can have a nice feast. It was like a spontaneous thing, out of the blue. He's partying with his friends, on this yacht, and he decides this is what he wants to do. When I used to go with him to visit these different properties, he'd always have a bead bag in his hand. He'd always, be with one hand was on the steering wheel, steering the car, and the other hand was in his bead bag, chanting.